Good evening, watchers of skies and keepers of quiet questions. Wherever this finds you, on a still balcony in Buenos Aires, a roadside motel in Nevada, or buried beneath soft blankets somewhere between waking and dreaming, I'm glad you're here. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to DrowsyTeller, where forgotten archives speak and the edges of truth flicker like candlelight. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because the stories we tell don't always wait to be found. Some wait to be remembered. Now, take a breath, lean back, and listen closely, because the tale you're about to hear begins with a simple transmission from a satellite long thought silent, and ends with the kind of silence that doesn't just settle in the air, it watches. The observatory in Geneva was never meant to host secrets. Its corridors smelled of dust and coffee, and the walls, lined with maps of constellations and particle interaction models, held the casual silence of scientists who believed the universe, however vast, was still explainable. Dr. Emil Waldner had worked there for over 20 years, the last 6 of them as little more than a procedural archivist for the European Space Agency's retired satellite data logs. The glamour had long faded. What remained was the slow erosion of questions and the dull comfort of conclusions. But on the evening of October 7, 2003, the satellite feed from Helios 3, long decommissioned, quietly forgotten, spiked awake. A telemetry packet arrived via backup channel, flagged as recovered residual data fragment. Normally, Emil would have marked it for deletion, but this one bore an unusual tag, OD21, level black. He blinked. He hadn't seen a black level tag in over a decade, not since Project Arcane. The designation alone was enough to bypass deletion protocol and force a manual review. He opened the file. The dataset was brief, just 2 seconds of raw infrared data, recorded at 11:11 UTC. The target was a galaxy known as GN Z2876, located on the Deep Field List, far beyond the Laniakea supercluster. The first half-second showed standard emission. Then, like a circuit being switched off, every registered energy point, every star, every radiant object collapsed into null. The temperature dropped to background cosmic noise. The galaxy had not gone dark. It had ceased. Emil leaned back in his chair. A joke, maybe? A synthetic calibration artifact. But the spectrograph held no trace of algorithmic interference. The deletion signature that followed was more troubling. Automated overwrite, blacked logs, and the final line, redacted by HES-21 clearance, per OD21, proceed to containment. He reached for the secure line, but it was already dead. That's when the room lights flickered once. Then again. At first, he assumed a power hiccup, but everything else, his computer, the monitoring system, even the coffee pot, remained stable. Only the overhead light pulsed, as if synchronized with something unseen. Then the screen blinked. A message, in monospace, appeared on the terminal. "You've seen it. Do not take another step." His heart pounded, but the rest of his body refused to respond. The cursor blinked at him. There was no source trace, no input origin. He yanked the LAN cable from the wall, but the screen remained active. The message disappeared, replaced with a timestamp, 11:11:02 UTC, then black. He shut the terminal off manually. Still black. Only then did Emil notice the office phone vibrating silently. He hadn't heard it ring. There was no number on the screen, only a red triangle where digits should be. Against his better judgment, he answered. The voice on the line was old, female, and heavily accented. Greek? Slavic? Her words were sharp, methodical. "You need to forget what you saw, Dr. Waldner. This is not your data anymore." He tried to respond, but she had already ended the call. He sat there, hand still on the receiver, trying to piece together what was real and what had just made his skin go cold. 2 hours later, when he returned to the terminal, still disconnected from the network, the Helios 3 log was gone. Even the archival pathway had been erased, but he had made a local backup. That much he was sure of. And when he opened the external drive he'd hidden in his lab drawer, he found something he hadn't saved. A single JPEG file titled Godframe01 JPG. The image was pitch black, until he adjusted the contrast and saw, very faintly, something that looked like a lattice of hexagonal filaments stretching across the entire frame, like veins or a net. At its center, a perfectly circular void, clean, absolute. He closed the drive and locked it in the drawer. Then he stared at his own reflection in the monitor, long after the screen had gone to sleep. Katerina Lefebvre had long abandoned the idea that physics was a science of certainty. Working at CERN's Quantum Field Analysis Division had stripped away any romantic notions she once held about order in the universe. Patterns frayed, symmetries broke, and reality, more often than not, refused to play by its own rules, which made her the perfect person for Emil Waldner to call. She arrived in Geneva 12 hours after his encrypted message, wearing a black coat and dark-rimmed glasses that made her look more like a political attaché than a physicist. The first thing she said upon entering his office wasn't a greeting. Who else saw it? No one, Emil answered. I didn't even send the full packet, just the tags. Katerina exhaled, visibly relaxing. Good. If someone else had pulled the frame, we'd both be flagged by now. I already was, Emil said, and handed her a printed screen cap of the warning message. She stared at it for a moment in silence. Then, we have very little time. They didn't connect the terminal to any networks. Everything was conducted from air-gapped machines, manual printouts, and code run on old laptops running obsolete Linux builds that hadn't updated in a decade. The data fragment from Helios 3 had been preserved in Emil's drive, untouched. When they opened it together, Katerina's face tensed. GN Z2876, again. You've seen this before? More than once, but not like this, she explained. Over the past 15 years, at least 4 known cases of sudden astronomical null detections had been buried beneath reclassified datasets. In each instance, the energy signature matched a similar pattern, sudden thermal collapse in non-visible spectrums, lasting less than 2 seconds. Each occurred at 11:11 UTC. The coincidences were too precise. These were chalked up to instrument failure, but the logs were redacted by OD21 protocol, same as yours. And what is OD21? Emil asked. She hesitated. There's a rumor. ESA and CERN run joint contingency layers called obelisk classes. They're not part of the public directive trees. OD21 is the deepest layer we've ever seen. It doesn't trigger unless something's considered observationally compromising. Compromising to who? To everything, she said. Together, they began trawling through physical archives, old ESA satellite logs, near-field infrared projects from the late 90s, even Soviet-era sky surveys declassified in name but not in content. The deeper they went, the more fragmented the data became. GN Z2876 showed up again, in a 1994 Japanese probe's outer field data, marked with a strange hexadecimal tag that Katerina traced back to a classified ESA event titled HESED Protocol. That phrase returned no official results, but in an obscure CERN memo from 2008, stored in a misclassified folder under Budget Reconciliation, they found a reference. Adjustments for HESED signatures require non-Newtonian compensation in Layer 3 arrays. Contact Dr. B. Mueller before engaging simulations. Layer 3 arrays weren't used in conventional astrophysics. They belonged to the deep field cognitive models, simulations meant to track pattern collapse in high-order probability space. In other words, Hesed was a quantum event signature, not a physical one. Something predicted, then deleted. Then came the audio file. Emil found it on an unlabeled CD-ROM stuffed into a discarded case marked Calibration La Silla 03. Inside, a time-stamped recording from October 7, 2003, exactly the time of the Helios 3 event. The audio was distorted, buried under cosmic background noise. But after 10 minutes, a low-frequency hum emerged, rhythmic, like a heartbeat under pressure. Katerina boosted the waveform and ran spectral analysis. It revealed a pattern, not music, not mechanical. Speech, structured and repeating, not in any known language. "That's not Earth-based phonetics," she murmured. "Machine-generated?" "No, it's organic, but wrong." They uploaded the file into a vocal deconstruction tool normally used for isolating pilot stress signals from black box recordings. It produced 3 seconds of reconstructed phonemes. The syllables weren't decipherable, but they repeated at perfect 11-second intervals. Emil watched the waveform shift, and an odd thought occurred to him, one he didn't say aloud. The voice wasn't communicating. It was measuring. At 2:43 a.m., the power to the archive lab flickered. The computers stayed on. The lights dimmed. And outside, just barely within the range of the security camera perched above the main gate, a black vehicle with no plates stood idling. It remained there for precisely 11 minutes. Then it drove away. Katerina looked at the screen and said nothing. They slept in the lab that night. The La Silla Observatory, nestled high in the Chilean Andes, had always stood as a testament to humanity's quiet persistence in staring into the void. Its domes were ancient by modern standards, relics of optical astronomy's golden age. Now, most of its usage was delegated to minor spectroscopic scans, student research, or atmospheric calibration. But it held a curious advantage. Because of its outdated systems and remote location, many of its observation logs were never fully digitized, which made it one of the last true blind spots in an increasingly connected network. It was also where the CD-ROM Emil and Katerina had found had supposedly originated. Katerina arrived first, under the cover of an academic pretext, an informal audit of legacy astronomical assets. The staff didn't ask questions. Most had long stopped caring who funded what. Within hours, she was granted supervised access to the off-site storage wing, an undercooled, dust-choked annex of steel cabinets and analog shelves, humming faintly with forgotten electricity. It was there, between a stack of unlabeled reel tapes and a water-damaged file box, that she found the document. Not digital, not even printed. Typed, on browned curling paper. It was titled in French, Observations Exceptionnelles, Hesed. It bore no institutional seal, only a symbol. A downward-pointing triangle, black, framed by concentric rings. At the bottom, a red wax stamp, half-faded. The document was brief, just a log of anomalies recorded between 1983 and 2003, all involving non-local collapses. What caught her attention was the recurring reference to GN-Z2876, listed under an internal designation, Corpus Fictus. She took photographs, quietly, methodically, and then contacted Emil, who was waiting in Geneva with a list of former La Silla personnel who had been part of infrared projects during the early 2000s. Only one name returned a hit, Dr. Arno Merrick, listed as deceased in 2009, but with no recorded obituary or grave. His personnel file, though thin, listed a last known address, a cabin near the coastal town of Caldera, abandoned after a classified chemical exposure incident in 2007. Katerina chartered a car and drove north, through arid hills and vast, unmarked roads flanked by salt flats and sun-bleached bones. The house, when she reached it, was little more than a concrete shell. Windows shattered, furniture overturned, dust thick as ash. But she found what she needed. Tucked inside an old locker in the bedroom was a locked tin box beneath a stack of books on astronomical cartography. Inside, 8 rolls of undeveloped film, 2 floppy disks, and a photograph. The image was old and creased, taken in front of La Silla's main dome. In it stood 3 people. One was unmistakably Arno Marek. Another was a woman she couldn't identify, and the third, a man in a red suit facing away from the camera. He was standing slightly off frame, angled as though watching something outside the photo's scope. Scrawled in the corner was a handwritten note. He watches, even through the dark. Back in Geneva, Emile was growing increasingly paranoid. Their internet access had been cut from the lab. His phone wouldn't charge, as though the outlet itself had been modified. The external drive now refused to open the Helios 3 archive. Every time he attempted to mount it, the system returned a single message. Access invalid. Observer present. He began noticing strange delays in response from devices. His keyboard would lag. The lights in his apartment would stutter as he moved. He felt watched, not by a person, but by the infrastructure itself. Katerina returned with the materials, and together they developed the film. Most were exposures of constellations, standard astrophotography. But the final roll held something else entirely. Frame by frame, it showed the GN Z2876 region. In the first few exposures, the galaxy appeared faint but intact. In the 7th, the core was flaring. By the 10th, it was gone. Nothing but static and empty starscape. But in the 12th frame, something appeared where the galaxy had been. A thin, geometric lattice of white shapes, arranged in a concentric design. Not natural, not dust, something constructed. They tried digitizing the image, but the scanner crashed every time. Emile finally took a photograph of the photograph itself. The phone's screen turned black. When he restarted it, the image had disappeared. But a new contact had been added to his list, with no number, no avatar, and only a single letter, S. When Katerina attempted to reprint the 12th frame, the printer began feeding blank pages. Then it printed one sheet, a block of text in 7-point font, stretching from corner to corner. It wasn't a language, not even symbols, just a pattern of dots and vertical lines. When run through a compression analyzer, the code resolved to a base 11 sequence. The translation read, "It is not the galaxy that ended. It is your measurement that failed. Prepare for correction." They both sat in silence for several minutes, not because they were afraid, though they were, but because for the first time neither of them could define what they were looking at. The data was responding. The anomaly wasn't being observed, it was observing them. In the silence of Norway's high Arctic, under perpetual twilight and kilometers of permafrost, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault had a twin no one acknowledged. Just beyond the tunnel mouth leading to the vault's secure botanic collections, a steel-enforced corridor branched off into the ice. It wasn't on any public schematic, not listed on any EU or UN security ledger. But it existed, and according to an obscure reference embedded in the CERN memo they recovered, this was where the Hased repository was maintained. The contact who led them there wasn't a scientist, nor a soldier. He introduced himself simply as the archivist, though his badge said nothing at all. Tall, built like a glacial monolith. He wore a cobalt blue parka with no insignia, spoke without accent, and seemed entirely unfazed by the implications of what he guarded. "There is no Project Hased," he said, as he guided them through the winding corridor lit by amber halogen strips. "But there are its remains, and those remain curious." He brought them into a room not much larger than a shipping container. Inside, dozens of labeled optical drives, a mechanical microfilm reader, and an ancient Hewlett-Packard terminal connected to nothing at all. No cables, no port, no power supply that either Emil or Katerina could identify. But the screen glowed faint green, flickering with a single message. Retrieval possible. Insert cipher. The archivist placed a small prism-shaped object onto a brass plate at the base of the machine. Instantly, data began scrolling. Not code, not logs, images. They watched in stunned silence as sequence after sequence of black and white captures appeared. Some were astronomical photos, familiar star fields, nebulae, deep-field composites. But every 12th image contained interference, structures that didn't belong, geometry that no telescope should have recorded, hexagonal grids, nested octahedrons, and in one case a spiral that appeared to rotate as the image refreshed. These are raw plates from the Hesed Cascade, the archivist said. Captured between 1998 and 2006, the satellites were meant to collect deep-field gravitational data. They found something else. Katerina stepped forward. Why is it archived here? Why not in Geneva? Because Geneva obeys, the man replied. The next image was dated March 12, 2003. It showed GN Zaton 2876, or what remained of it. But overlaid on the frame in a faint white noise band was something new, a waveform, not audio, temporal. Emil leaned in. This looks like a quantum echo. More like a clock, the archivist said. The waveform, when converted into frequency code, revealed a repeating cycle, 11 minutes and 11 seconds. Over and over. It wasn't just a burst, it was a heartbeat. The collapse of the galaxy hadn't been instantaneous. It had been gradual, compressed into a timescale the human eye couldn't process. What they'd thought was a sudden annihilation was instead a controlled disassembly. Katerina felt the weight of it settle in her chest. This wasn't an accident. No, the archivist said. It was a message. Hesed wasn't just an observation program. It was a linguistic interface. Someone, or something, tried to initiate communication using gravitational collapse as syntax. Outside, a tremor passed through the ground, subtle but real. The archivist paused, his face tensed. "They've found us," he said. The backup lights flickered red. Katerina grabbed the microfilm. Emil stuffed the prism object into his coat. They ran, not away, but deeper, through maintenance corridors until they reached a vertical shaft with an emergency ladder. Somewhere behind them, something heavy was being forced open. They emerged 6 minutes later through a hatch camouflaged as a snowdrift. The wind outside screamed like an open wound. A helicopter, not military but black, windowless, and without registration, was already lifting off in the distance. The archivist didn't follow them. By the time they made it back to Longyearbyen, Emil's encrypted phone had received a single image. It was a frame from the vault they'd just left. It showed the empty archive room, and in the corner, almost obscured by shadow, stood the man in the red suit. He wasn't facing the camera, but he was closer now. In the crypt beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, humidity clung to the stone like breath to glass. The custodians of the site claimed the passage had been sealed since the Ottoman period, but Katerina knew better. The coordinates embedded within the archivist's prism had pointed to a section beneath the western nave, an area not marked on tourist maps nor in official archaeological surveys. With forged Vatican clearance and a late-night entry negotiated through a distracted subdeacon, she entered the darkness with Emil at her side and a single LED lamp held like a relic. They found it behind a crumbling wall, marked by an engraving worn nearly smooth, a spiral surrounded by 11 dots. At its center, an inscription in ancient Aramaic, "He will return as silence returns to the void." The passage led to a chamber no larger than a freight elevator. Inside were three things: a stone basin filled with dried ash, an ancient astronomical chart etched into a bronze plate, and a wall-mounted mechanism that looked like a celestial clock. It had no hands, just a rotating disc with concentric rings of numbers. The outermost ring ticked once every few minutes. The inner rings moved faster, pulsing in patterns that resembled binary, but were not. At the base of the basin was a stone tile that had been recently disturbed. Beneath it, wrapped in a synthetic weatherproof membrane, was a sealed canister. It bore no markings, except the same downward-pointing triangle they had seen in La Silla. Inside was a hard drive. Not modern, possibly military. Its architecture was Cold War era, but the connectors were unfamiliar. They brought it to a trusted contact in Tel Aviv, a retired Mossad cryptographer named Yael, now running a data recovery business out of a bakery's basement. She took one look at the casing and paled. "I've seen this before," she said. "In footage from Dimona. You don't want to know what this is." The device contained only one file, encrypted, compressed, deeply fragmented. But Yael managed to decode a partial header. Project Keter Gematria. The recovered fragment was a document, half scanned, half photographed, describing a joint Israeli-Romanian operation from 1972 to 1978 involving non-electromagnetic harmonics detected during celestial disappearance patterns. The operation's name, Baruch Aleph. The implications were staggering. Someone had known about disappearances long before 2003. GNZ2876 wasn't the first, just the most obvious. Further in the document was a list of global observatories, some real, some fictional, linked to confirmed harmonic events. All shared a bizarre commonality. Each site had experienced electrical failure on March 12th of a different year. Not a solar storm, not a glitch, a total electromagnetic pause lasting exactly 11 minutes and 11 seconds. More disturbing, several locations on the list weren't scientific at all. Among them, the Hagia Sophia, the Great Pyramid of Giza, and an abandoned monastery in Siberia. When Katerina overlaid the coordinates on a global map, they formed a loose spiral. Interlocking, imperfect, but intentional. Emil stared at the image for a long time. "We're not looking at stars anymore," he said. "We're looking at an interface." Later that night, Yael called in a panic. Someone had broken into her bakery. The computers were gone, but not the drive. That she had hidden inside a bag of flour. The camera footage showed nothing, literally. For a span of 11 minutes and 11 seconds, the CCTV recorded blackness. Total darkness, but without interruption. As if the world itself had paused. Katerina retrieved the drive and found a slip of paper taped to the back, handwritten in pencil. It read, "You've entered the noise, but the signal is coming." When Katerina and Emil reached McMurdo Station under diplomatic science credentials arranged through a Chilean astronomy foundation, the night sky over Antarctica burned with a cold aurora, green and violet waves pulsing rhythmically across the void. It was summer in the southern hemisphere, but nothing about the wind that scraped the tin walls of the station felt warm. They weren't here for McMurdo itself. Their interest lay another 400 kilometers inland, at the ruins of outpost AO-99, a Soviet-era atmospheric research installation abandoned in the early 90s and classified by both Russia and the U.S. as non-operational due to unresolvable environmental hazard. The coordinates matched one of the harmonic points from the Jerusalem chart. Their guide, a weathered Kiwi named Dorian, who ran logistics for independent expeditions, agreed to take them there in exchange for silence and fuel. "You're not the first ones to ask about AO-99, he muttered as they checked gear. but you might be the last ones who make it back. The journey took 3 days by tracked snowcat, crawling across uncharted sheets of ice and through bitter, blinding storms. They arrived to find the facility nearly buried. Only the upper domes of the communication arrays breached the snowpack like bleached bones. Inside, frost covered every surface. Desks lay overturned, equipment shattered or frozen solid. Yet there was no sign of human remains, no blood, no scrawled final notes, only silence and the crunch of their boots on brittle tile. Then, in the generator room, Emil found it. A protected hard case marked in Cyrillic. Record 0 Beta. The contents were miraculous. A reel-to-reel magnetic tape recorder, a collection of compact discs sealed in foil, and a notebook with coordinates, dates, and temperature readings. One entry, dated March 10, 2002, was circled multiple times in red. Beneath it, Tochka odklonenia, Adinets at 11. Point of deviation, 11:11. The tape was old, but Dorian's team had a portable reader. What they heard was not audio in the usual sense. It was a low-frequency drone that modulated every 67 seconds, a harmonic not naturally occurring in known atmospheric systems, but overlaid on the waveform, faintly embedded, was a pattern that Emil recognized instantly. 11 minutes and 11 seconds. The same temporal sequence. But in this version, it began with static and ended with a voice. A single Russian phrase spoken clearly through layers of distortion. On zdесь раньше нас. It was here before us. Katerina stood motionless as the voice repeated. Then again, quieter, as if fading beneath layers of time. The second disc, far newer, contained digital logs extracted from the station's last network burst before being officially disconnected. It had been routed, bizarrely, not through Russian infrastructure, but through a satellite uplink to a European relay. That relay, upon tracing, had passed through Geneva. Not the public CERN channels, but through a secondary network known in classified records as Golem, a shadow layer communications backbone originally built for encrypted transnational simulations. In those final data packets was something else. A small compressed file labeled Merkava X. When decrypted, it contained a mathematical model, a simulation file so complex it choked Katerina's laptop. Once Emil offloaded it onto a field-grade quantum decryption tool, they saw the model for what it was. A star system. One that no longer existed. But more chilling, the simulation was not of its collapse but of its disassembly into vector components. As if the entire star system had been translated into equations and mapped into a synthetic framework. Space, light, and time, folded, reduced, stored. Dorian didn't ask questions. He refused to return with them to McMurdo, choosing instead to follow a second path southward to another depot. Whatever you touched back there, he said, it noticed. On the flight back to Punta Arenas, Katerina scrolled through old reports of missing expeditions near AO 99. In one case, the only thing recovered had been a video camera. Its footage showed a man staring upward into a blizzard, muttering a single phrase on repeat. The eye in the snow never blinks. When she checked the time code, the recording had frozen. For 11 minutes and 11 seconds. There are corridors beneath Vatican City that don't exist on any blueprint. Some are carved from ancient Roman catacombs, others from more modern vaults meant to resist nuclear impact. They call it Archivum Septem, the seventh archive, though the name never appears in official records. Access is restricted to a cardinal-level security clearance. Katerina, through a chain of academic favors, blackmail, and years of patient groundwork, had been granted a brief, escorted entry. She was led by Monsignor Ferretti, a skeletal man with deep-set eyes and a gait like a spider on marble. He spoke in clipped Latin phrases, refusing to answer questions. They descended 6 levels beneath the papal library before entering a narrow hallway, the walls lined with glass boxes containing sealed scrolls, fossilized tablets, and devices no one had dared to power on in decades. At the end of the corridor was a single chamber. On the floor, a stone circle with concentric symbols, etched in 12 languages, including Sanskrit, Akkadian, and Binary. Ferretti gestured toward the table. "You have 17 minutes." On the table lay an unassuming folder labeled Speculum Caeli, the mirror of the heavens. Inside were documents, some handwritten in medieval Latin, others printed on IBM punch card stock. The oldest piece appeared to be a vellum chart, dated to the year 1137, mapping what resembled constellations. But these constellations did not match Earth's sky. Yet, when Katerina inverted the celestial map to infrared and overlaid it onto a simulation of the known universe, she froze. The star pattern matched the infrared footprint of GN Z2876, almost perfectly. The same spatial distortion signature, the same gravitational curvatures. A note beneath the chart read, "In silence they will vanish, one by one, until the Earth sees only itself in the mirror." Another document, dated 1979 and stamped with the sigil of Opus Dei, described an internal inquiry into a Vatican-funded observatory in Peru that reported the fading of a dark sun. The observatory was destroyed in a fire days later. No footage, no survivors. The last recorded signal from the observatory, a digital sequence, 1111 Hz, repeating for 11 minutes and 11 seconds. Ferretti abruptly interrupted. "Time is up." As he escorted her back to the surface, he handed her a sealed envelope. "This was left for you, 2 weeks ago." She hesitated. She hadn't told anyone of this visit. The envelope was handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single phrase. "The eye you seek already saw you." That night, back in her hotel in Trastevere, Emil ran a deep dive on the Vatican's satellite infrastructure. One signal stood out, a defunct communications link called Orbita Cherub, a Vatican-controlled satellite launched in 2003 under the guise of climate monitoring. Its orbit, curiously, was a mirror path to the satellite that had first recorded the disappearance of GN Z2876. Katerina accessed its last downlink before deactivation. The file was encrypted with a key known only to 6 cardinals, yet she bypassed it using data from the Merkava X fragment in Antarctica. The file contained a sequence of frames, not images but pulses, binary flashes, 11 clusters, each containing 11 pulses, spread across a total duration of 11 minutes and 11 seconds. Emil stared at the pulse train. "This isn't a warning," he whispered. "It's a countdown." Katerina looked out the window. Across Rome, the lights of the city flickered briefly, almost imperceptibly, but her heart caught the pattern. 11, 11, 11. In the weeks that followed the Vatican encounter, the world seemed to tighten its grip on Katerina and Emil. Their movements were shadowed, devices intermittently disabled, and several contacts went dark. An Argentinian astrophysicist who had once worked on gravitational harmonics out of Mendoza disappeared en route to a conference in Lisbon. A data courier from Jodrell Bank Observatory was found dead in a canal in Amsterdam, his encrypted drive wiped clean. What remained was only a growing sense that whatever they were approaching was already aware of them, and already ahead. The breakthrough came not through satellites or maps, but through a dying man. His name was Pyotr Natanovich, once a codebreaker for the Warsaw Pact, later a reclusive archivist for the UN's defunct Global Data Integrity Group. Katerina tracked him through a crumbling university ledger, the kind only maintained by handwritten marginalia. He agreed to meet her at a derelict observatory outside Krakow, a place sealed since the early 90s after a so-called magnetospheric collapse rendered its instruments unreliable. Piotr was skeletal, his voice shallow and brittle as parchment. He didn't waste time. "Do you know the term eidetic interference compression?" he asked, eyes watery behind thick lenses. Emil blinked. "That's a data myth, like the digital equivalent of numerology." "It's real," Piotr whispered, "and we discovered it too late." What he revealed was staggering. During the Cold War, both NATO and the Soviet Union independently discovered that certain astrophysical anomalies, especially rapid deletion events like GN-Z2876, caused not just electromagnetic distortions but data distortions. Files near real-time uplinks, regardless of security or redundancy, began to degrade, overwrite, or loop unnaturally when aligned with specific frequency clusters. In 1984, he said, a Soviet relay telescope picked up a harmonic disturbance just like what you described. 11 minutes, 11 seconds. We lost 36% of our system archives. They were overwritten with something we called the stigmata code, repeating fractal glyphs that defied linguistic mapping. We locked them away, but they started appearing in unrelated systems, weather reports, financial servers, even medical records. Katerina leaned forward. "Like a virus?" "No, a presence." He handed her a thin lead case. Inside, a black wafer. "This is one of the few fragments we isolated before the network burned out. It's still active." They didn't trust their own equipment. Back in Zurich, Emil assembled an isolated lab rig with optical splitters and EM shielding. As he connected the wafer to a non-networked interface, something extraordinary happened. The screen flashed, not binary, not visuals, but sequences of geometric compression, shapes collapsing inward, folding, forming a grid. 11 columns, 11 rows. Within this matrix, a pattern formed, not a symbol, but a place. Latitude and longitude coordinates resolved. A deep ocean trench in the western Pacific near the Mariana Arc. A point that had appeared once before, in a classified USGS anomaly report from 2003, the same year GN-Z2876 vanished. But there was more. The interface registered an outbound signal, despite total physical isolation. Not through cable, not wireless, quantum bleed. Something was responding from within the matrix. Katerina pulled up her network isolation monitor. One word had been seeded into the system's BIOS. Salome. They searched for it everywhere. Language roots, machine codes, religious texts. It didn't exist. But on a whim, Emil cross-checked it against astronomical catalogs. A faint radio transient detected 5 years ago by a decommissioned Japanese satellite had been unofficially nicknamed Salome by the lab intern who logged it. The coordinates, the same deep trench in the Pacific, down beyond human reach. Piotr was gone by the time they returned to Krakow. No sign of struggle, no body. Just a journal left open on the desk with one line underlined repeatedly in ink. He who listens long enough to the eye begins to speak with a voice that is not his own. Katerina closed the book and whispered, "We're not tracing a disappearance. We're tracing a footprint." Outside, the winter air tasted of iron. Somewhere, a tide was shifting. Not in the ocean, in the code. The ocean was not still, not even at its deepest points. What appeared on satellite maps as void blue calm, masking gradients of kilometers, was in fact a field of tension, of unseen tides, of unmeasured currents twisting like the nerves of a body ancient and aware. As the research vessel Dauphin approached the marked coordinates over the Mariana Arc, The crew had already begun to fracture under an unnamed pressure. Equipment behaved erratically. Internal clocks drifted out of sync. The ship's autopilot system crashed twice without error logs. Emil called it ambient interference. Katerina no longer tried to rationalize. The exact location, derived from the Stigmata Code's compression pattern, lay over an unnamed subduction trench 200 nautical miles east of Guam. This zone, a fracture intersecting the Western Pacific's tectonic underbelly, was supposedly stable. Yet seismic sensors aboard Dauphin reported microquakes in symmetrical clusters every 11 hours, 11 minutes, and 11 seconds. They began diving on day 2. The ROV, a deep-sea drone named Squalus II, descended through kilometers of darkness, broadcasting grainy visual feeds back to the surface. At 10,900 meters, it passed through a dense thermocline, then an anomalous current field where the water pressure seemed inconsistent with depth. Pockets of decreased resistance as if cavities existed where none should. At 11,140 meters, the signal stuttered, then stabilized. What it showed froze the room into silence. A structure. At first, it appeared natural, a basaltic ridge shaped like a crescent. But as the drone rotated, the crescent resolved into perfect geometry, a symmetrical arc studded with columns, each equidistant and precisely angled toward magnetic north. At its center stood an opening, not a cave, but an entrance. Crafted, measured. It was, in essence, a door. Surrounding it was a field of strange mineral formations, obelisks no taller than 2 meters, all inscribed with glyphs matching the pattern from the Vatican scrolls and the Antarctica substrate. Some of the glyphs pulsed faintly in infrared. Others seemed to distort light entirely, as if bending visual data around themselves. The drone approached the central structure. At 11,173 meters, the feed fragmented into static, not sudden loss, but slow, almost deliberate deconstruction. Image compression gave way to spirals, then to glyphic overlays, then to a blank screen. Then something new. A voice, not in sound, but in code. Embedded in the last received transmission was a series of data packets, formatted in pulse train rhythm. 11 bits per segment. 11 segments. Emil converted the waveform to audio. It emitted a low-frequency hum, consistent, resonant, and then, layered over it, a spectral modulation that, when visualized, displayed a shape, the same 11 by 11 matrix, and at its center, a void. Katerina sat motionless. "It's responding," she said, not asking. That night, the ship's primary power grid failed. The sky overhead, cloudless until now, bloomed with auroral veils, green, violet, and blue, dancing along magnetic lines like synthetic serpents. But they weren't natural, their patterns repeated. 11 strokes, 11-second pulses. A signal. The ocean was no longer quiet. A noise echoed through the hull, subaudible, below hearing range but felt in the teeth and the spine. Emil collapsed briefly from vertigo. The crew, already anxious, now spoke in panicked fragments. 2 divers locked themselves in the equipment hold. The captain ordered return. Katerina refused. On the final night, she activated the backup ROV and transmitted a manual sequence, a forced entry override to direct the drone through the gate beneath the sea. It was a suicide command. The drone responded, descended into the black. The feed lasted 1 minute. In that minute, it showed a corridor, impossibly linear, its walls alive with shifting light and fluid matter. At the end, a sphere of perfect black, suspended in place, absorbing all photons. As the drone approached, the feed shuttered, then transmitted a single frame, a face, not human, not alien, a mirror. Then the signal died. and the Aurora vanished. They returned to Guam under armed escort. Upon arrival, the entire crew was debriefed by an anonymous agency. All footage was confiscated. Emil and Katerina were separated. She never saw him again. But weeks later, an unmarked parcel arrived at her apartment in Zurich. Inside, a single USB drive, no markings, no metadata, one file. lastlightframe.tiff. She opened it. 11 horizontal stripes, 11 vertical bands, a matrix. At the center, a pulse. It was still transmitting. And beneath the pulse, embedded in hexadecimal metadata, a new word. Yours. Katerina hadn't spoken in 3 days. The apartment in Zurich was stripped of all network devices. Curtains taped shut, light bulbs unscrewed. Every sound, a footstep in the hallway, a pigeon striking the roof, registered as an alert. She ate standing, slept with one eye half open. The USB drive never left her hand. Whatever it was, she knew one thing for certain. It hadn't been a message. It had been an invitation. Or perhaps a diagnostic. Her old university credentials gave her limited access to CERN's Tier 0 archival systems. Just enough to search retired telemetry files from the early 2000s. One entry surfaced, buried under a layer of failed indexing. A burst event from August 16, 2003, timestamped just 4 seconds after GNZ2876's disappearance. The log was short. It noted a localized quantum anomaly, non-causal harmonic feedback, within the LHC's prototype detectors, despite the collider being offline at the time. The anomaly lasted 11 seconds. She pulled the metadata. Inside, a reference pointer to an internal directory labeled Selene, the same word embedded in the BIOS weeks earlier. It wasn't a name, it was a framework, Seleme, synthetic electromagnetic lattice for external memory, encoding and interception. It had been a covert European initiative in the late 90s, intended to interface with high-energy astrophysical phenomena using quantum resonance fields. It was scrapped, or so the reports claimed. But now Katerina could see what really happened. The project had succeeded, and it had listened to something it shouldn't have. Seleme wasn't just an interface, it had become a receiver, a door left open in the foundations of physics, one that, once tuned to the correct frequency, could no longer be shut. That night, she activated the file. lastlightframe.tiff opened again, the same 11 by 11 matrix. But this time, the center square pulsed irregularly. Clicking it triggered a recursive function. Windows opened, stacked, collapsed. At their core, a single frame emerged. An image taken not from a satellite or drone, but from within the trench. It showed the sphere again, but this time it was no longer alone. Around it, silhouettes, vague, bipedal, faceless. Not creatures' forms. Shadows of things that should not exist in geometry but did, writhing, nested, recursive, pulsing with meaning beyond cognition. Katerina's nose began to bleed. The image vibrated at a subvisual frequency. She shut the laptop, threw it across the room, breathing ragged through her sleeve. But the humming continued, from the walls, from the sky. By morning, Zurich reported massive communication blackouts. Satellites began to fall out of sync. One Russian satellite, Cosmos 2534, spontaneously dropped into decaying orbit. Amateur radio bands were flooded with indecipherable pulses. The matrix was expanding, or maybe duplicating. Katerina fled. Not because she believed she could stop it, but because she feared she was now a part of it. In Greenland, an old research station once used by NATO glaciologists stood abandoned. She reached it after days of evasion, hiking across snow-blind ridges under auroral storm fronts that hadn't been forecast. From there, she initiated a final broadcast, not to the world, but to anyone else who might still be watching. The message was short. Salome is awake. GN Z2876 was not an accident. It was a controlled burn. We are next. I saw the gate. I saw myself inside it. If this transmission is recovered, do not respond. Do not try to look. This was never a signal for us. It was a system check. A harvest protocol. The stars are not silent. They are counting. The screen flickered. Her reflection stared back from the lens. But something was wrong. The outline of her head, the shape of her eyes, the symmetry, too perfect. She smiled, or something wearing her face did. And then the camera went dark. All around the globe, 11 random locations began to report anomalous magnetic spikes. The ocean boiled in one, a desert cracked open in another. Above them, satellites winked out. Not destroyed, absorbed. Somewhere far beyond the veil of known light, another galaxy extinguished. And in the control logs of a private observatory in northern Chile, an unrequested maintenance ping appeared. Source unknown. Destination unknown. Payload yours. The Lodge of Styx. It sat apart from the rest of the compound, accessible only via a hidden service road not listed on any guest maps. I'd spotted it during my first sweep of the grounds, but hadn't had the opportunity to get close. From the outside, it appeared unremarkable. Just another rustic lodge meant to blend into the woods. Inside, however, the security was anything but standard. Biometric scanners, electromagnetic locks, motion detectors capable of picking up a heartbeat from 50 feet away. Luckily, my unknown benefactor had given me more than a forged pass. Sewn into my suit's inner lining was a USB device, disguised as an ordinary flash drive but loaded with high-level infiltration software. Whoever designed it knew exactly what they were doing. I plugged it into a maintenance port near the entry console. Within seconds, the sensors were temporarily disabled, and the lock codes appeared on the device's tiny screen. Access granted. Whoever wanted me inside had prepared this with surgical precision. The lodge's main floor was a facade. Behind a false wall, hidden behind a sliding panel, was a staircase descending deep into the earth. The walls changed from wood to stone. This passage wasn't built with modern tools. It was ancient, carved into the bedrock, lit by electrical fixtures retrofitted into what once were torch sconces. At the bottom stood a thick oak door, heavy with iron rivets. Beyond it lay a chamber that defied logic. The room stretched far beyond the building's above-ground footprint. Stone shelves covered the walls, stacked with leather-bound journals, scrolls, and artifacts from across centuries and civilizations. In the center stood a massive black table, carved from a single slab of obsidian. Its surface was cluttered with documents, blueprints, maps, and folders bearing government seals. I moved to the shelves first, selecting a journal labeled 1923-1945. The handwriting was elegant, but the contents were horrifying. The European situation proceeds according to plan. Our associates in Berlin believe they serve the fatherland, but they serve the ancient ones. The sacrifice of the lesser peoples will empower the next phase of the work. Another journal, more recent, Operation Mockingbird exceeds expectations. Media channels follow our cues without hesitation. They think they're defending democracy, but they deliver our narrative. The masses accept any reality we choose to feed them. But it was the documents on the table that unraveled my understanding of the modern world. Blueprints for the USA Patriot Act, dated 6 months before September 11th. Military strategy documents for Iraq with fabricated WMD intel. Early drafts of social media algorithms, not built for connection, but for division, to fragment society into polarizable echo chambers. There were plans for pandemic responses prioritizing social control over public health, and blueprints for digital currencies designed to eliminate financial privacy entirely. One file detailed population reduction policies masked as environmental reforms. But the final document was what chilled me to the bone. A participant roster dating back to the 1870s, when the Bohemian Club was founded. Names I recognized from textbooks, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Ford, but then came names that didn't make sense. Men who, by the laws of biology, should not still be alive. Either the records were fabricated, or some of these participants weren't human. At the bottom of the most recent page, a note written in fresh ink. E. Granger, journalist, witnessed Inner Circle ceremony, July 16, 2023, status, asset or liability, recommendation, terminate if no compliance by dawn, July 18th. They had known exactly who I was. From the moment I arrived, the invitation, the forged pass, the flawless access, it had all been a test. And I was failing. A motion sensor pinged. Red lights flared along the walls. From above, the sound of boots on stone echoed downward. They were coming. I grabbed as many documents as I could, stuffed them into my jacket, and searched for an exit. But there was only one. The same stairwell now filling with hostile footsteps. The voices grew louder, clipped, professional. Tactical jargon, military. Then the lights went out. Emergency red lighting flickered on a moment later, and in that brief, perfect darkness, I heard it. A voice, not through my ears but inside my mind. Run, little journalist. Run and tell the world what you've seen. But no, the telling will be your doom. And salvation requires far greater sacrifices than one man's life. When the lights stabilized, a section of the wall had slid open, revealing a narrow stone tunnel. I didn't hesitate. Whatever had spoken to me, whether it was one of the ancient ones or something worse, it had just saved my life. The tunnels beneath Bohemian Grove stretched for miles, ancient passageways that linked natural caves with man-made catacombs. The walls were etched with sigils I'd seen before, but older, deeper, worn smooth by time and use. I followed the main corridor, guided only by faint phosphorescent moss. The glow was just enough to avoid the worst of the hazards. Behind me, I heard pursuit. Voices, flashes of light, radio bursts. But the farther I went, the more distant they became. Either they couldn't find the entrance, or they didn't want to follow me into these depths. Eventually, the passage began to slope upward. The air grew fresher, filled with the scent of rain and moss. A natural exit, concealed by dense vines, led me out into the woods, several miles from the main compound. I emerged into a thunderstorm. The sky churned with clouds. Fat raindrops struck the leaves around me. Perfect cover, if I could reach my car before the search perimeter expanded. But as I moved through the trees, heart pounding, one thought began to rise in my mind. I wasn't alone. Figures moved between the trees, not soldiers, not security personnel, something else. They wore the bone-white owl masks from the Inner Circle ritual, but something about their movements was wrong. Too smooth, too deliberate, more like dancers than men. And their eyes, faintly glowing with an eerie bioluminescence, weren't reflecting light. They were producing it. The journalist has seen too much, one of them said. The words were perfectly clear, though the rising thunder should have drowned them out. The ancient ones are displeased, said another, but the pact must be honored. He was brought here for a reason. Let him carry the message. Let them know what awaits. I ran. Behind me, I heard laughter, not angry or mocking, but patient, predatory. The laughter of something that knew its prey had nowhere to run. I made it to my rental car just as the storm erupted. Rain hammered the windshield as I tore down the back roads, avoiding highways, burning through stop signs and red lights. In my jacket, the stolen documents radiated heat, or maybe that was just panic. But I'd escaped. I had proof. Tangible evidence of a conspiracy that shaped world events from a hidden grove in California. Or so I thought. I uploaded everything to a secure offshore server farm in Iceland. The photos, the audio recordings, the scans, my notes, multiple backups, anonymous networks, military-grade encryption. Within 6 hours, every single file had been wiped or corrupted. When I returned home, my apartment had been ransacked. Nothing obviously stolen, but every electronic device was gone. Laptop, phone, backup drives. Even the digital camera I'd locked in a drawer, erased. The mainstream press wouldn't touch the story. The alt-news blogs that initially expressed interest suddenly ghosted me. Forum posts about the Grove vanished within minutes. Reddit threads disappeared mid-comment. Search results rewrote themselves. It was as if the entire internet had been sterilized. But the worst part? The dreams. Every night I'm visited by visions, towering, tentacled beings that drift between dimensions, feeding on human pain, preparing to reshape reality into something unspeakable. Cities drowned beneath oceans of black slime, skies torn open with screaming winds. Human beings, what remains of them, transformed into docile herds. They whispered to me, not that I'm a hero, not even a victim, a messenger. I wasn't meant to expose their secret. I was meant to deliver it, to spread the knowledge, to break humanity's spirit, not to warn, but to infect. Every word I type, every whisper I share, becomes another vector of despair. Hope corrodes. Institutions rot. Resistance withers before it begins. That's their real weapon, not death, hopelessness. I'm writing this final entry from a motel room in Reno. I haven't stayed in one place more than a few hours in 3 days. But I know it doesn't matter. They aren't hunting me. They don't need to. I'm already doing their work, simply by remembering what I saw. The cremation of care wasn't just symbolic. It wasn't theater. It was a recruitment ceremony. And I wasn't an intruder. I was the initiate. Tonight, I'll drive east, toward the desert. Maybe I'll find some way to end this, to turn their tools against them. Or maybe I'll vanish, let the truth die with me. But if you're reading this, if these words somehow slipped through their filters, then remember. They say they're burning care. But what they're really burning is conscience. And every time those flames flicker, the world grows a little colder, a little darker, a little closer to being reclaimed by something ancient, something that's been waiting longer than we've existed. The fire in the grove never goes out. It spreads, invisible, inevitable, until everything human is ash. And in those ashes, something hungry is waiting to be born. Project Aegis. Hello again, fellow night travelers and digital truth seekers. Whether you're listening from a busy city street, a quiet suburb, or somewhere far off the grid, we're glad you've tuned in to Sleep Theories, the place where the stories no one wants told finally find a voice. Tonight's story isn't fiction. It begins with a retired military satellite, KH-14B, officially decommissioned 3 years ago, its role absorbed by newer systems after budget cuts. But at 3:47 a.m., Novosen's custom scanner picked up an encrypted signal routed directly through that dead transponder. "Lynx, you need to see this," she called across the converted warehouse that served as their base. The space looked like a digital morgue, walls glowing with server light, red string connecting printouts of government contracts and biotech patents. Lynx Rodriguez rolled over in his chair, steam rising from his fourth coffee. At 32, he carried the kind of weight that came from knowing things. Former NSA turned whistleblower, now living in the shadows. Military-grade encryption, he muttered, studying the waveform. But using outdated protocols. Whoever sent this wanted it to look forgotten. Nova's fingers blurred across 3 keyboards, but the timestamp's fresh. From the corner, Jax glanced up, purple hair catching the glow. How fresh. 15 minutes. The room fell silent. Professor Kale appeared from the lab in the back. At 58, he was the oldest among them, a virologist disgraced for asking too many questions during the pandemic years. "Did you crack it?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Nova's screen filled with cascading code. Her decryption algorithms chewed through obfuscation like a fire through paper. The file appeared. Project Aegis 2030. Lynx's voice dropped. That's bad. He remembered it. A theoretical black-budget proposal buried deep in Pentagon archives. Population dynamics, strategic resource modeling. Let's see how theoretical it still is, Nova said, opening the document. Her face changed. Curiosity gave way to disbelief. Then horror. "Guys," she whispered, "this isn't surveillance, it's extinction." Jax spun in her chair. "Say that again?" Nova highlighted the key variables. Fertility suppression vectors, genomic sorting algorithms, population sealing mechanisms, mass vaccination campaigns, engineered disruptions to food chains, climate-targeted survival zones, target retention, 6 to 8% of current population. The silence was suffocating. 6 to 8%? Kaylee repeated. "Of over 7 billion people," Lynx said, mind racing. "That's not control," Jax said. "That's genocide, rendered in spreadsheets." Nova kept scrolling. "Listen to this," she read. "Traditional methods of managing growth, war, famine, disease, are no longer sufficient. Project Aegis offers a unified species-wide reset." "They're not talking about society," Jax said. "They're talking about us." "No," Nova corrected. "Not like people, more like weeds." Kale sat down, stunned. In his years of classified research, he'd seen plenty of red lines crossed. But this was the edge of human civilization. "We have to verify," he said. "Cross-reference programs, trace code fragments, build a timeline." "If it's real," Nova began. "It is real," Lynx said, "and it's already happening." He opened secure contacts. Former colleagues, embedded allies. Jax dove into genetic databases, tracking crossovers between known research and the code they'd found. Nova began cloning the file, storing it on darknets, air-gapped servers, encrypted cold storage. "Professor," she said, "we'll need your expertise to analyze the biological payload." As the team dispersed to their stations, the room felt heavier. They hadn't just found a secret. They'd stumbled upon a blueprint for the end of human history. Outside, the city slept, oblivious to what had just been uncovered. Nova stared at the file name blinking on her screen, Aegis 2030.gc. In mythology, Aegis was the divine shield, protection of the gods. But protection for whom? And protection from what? A line from the file's executive summary echoed in her mind. "This isn't about control. It's about resetting the species." The countdown, she realized, had already begun. And it wasn't ticking toward a distant apocalypse, it was ticking toward tomorrow. But everything changes when you dig beneath the surface of the closed-door sessions. A classified document appears, heavily redacted, but with just enough exposed text to piece together a chilling story. The header reads, "Adaptive Earth Framework. Preliminary Implementation Strategies." Kale leans in, adjusting his glasses. "I remember that summit. I was a grad student back then, working on my dissertation in population genetics. There were rumors about private meetings, But no one ever spoke about what happened inside. Someone did, Nova replies quietly. She highlights a section buried in the document. The room seems to grow colder as the text becomes clear. Non-essential demographic drift must be addressed through coordinated intervention. Genetic dead zones offer an opportunity for selective resource allocation. Acceptable collateral impact established at 85 to 90% reduction over 2 generations. Integration of medical, agricultural, and environmental vectors is essential. Jax looks up from their terminal, a sudden intensity in their eyes. Nova, you need to see this. They project a map onto the shared screen, cross-referencing pharmaceutical patents and vaccination data. Dozens of biotech filings between 2018 and 2023, all tied to a tangled web of shell companies, each linked to mRNA modification platforms. But it's not just vaccines, Jax continues. These aren't about disease prevention. They're dormant genetic editing tools, remotely activated. Environmental triggers, airborne catalysts, stuff we don't even have public terminology for yet. Kale turns pale. That's impossible. In 2018, we didn't have the tech for that kind of delayed activation. We do now, Jax says grimly, and according to these patents, it's already deployed. Nova pulls up another file from the Aegis cache. Professor, remember you mentioned unusual test results in the pandemic trials? Kale nods slowly. Some immune responses in control groups didn't match the expected profiles. Proteins with no therapeutic function, unexplained inconsistencies. When I questioned it, they destroyed your career, Nova finishes. Labeled you a conspiracy theorist. I was asking the wrong questions, he mutters. I was looking for immediate reactions. But if the compounds were meant for delayed activation... Lynx slides his chair over, placing a stack of printed intelligence documents on the table. I've been combing through NSA surveillance reports from the pandemic period. Rural areas, places that typically resist federal outreach, had unusually high vaccine participation. He spreads a map across the table. Bright clusters highlight isolated counties in Montana, farming towns in Iowa, scattered communities along the Appalachian spine. These aren't random, Nova says, connecting the data points. They're strategic. Or genetic, Kale whispers. Jax's terminal pings with a new alert. Guys, there's chatter on the dark web, medical anomalies, forum threads, fringe case reports, private clinic logs. The display fills with disturbing trends. Unexplained fertility crashes in rural zones, autoimmune surges in adults aged 25 to 45, mysterious congenital defects, and illnesses unresponsive to any treatment. Nova begins mapping the anomalies to vaccine trial locations, birth rate charts, and demographic clusters. A pattern emerges, terrifyingly clear. It's not just disease suppression, she murmurs. It's genomic manipulation. They're rewriting what it means to be human, on a generational scale. Lynx pulls up another classified file, more recent. There's something else, he says. Homeland Security's been running something called genetic compatibility mapping. They've been collecting DNA through hospitals, clinics, school swabs, but they're not just cross-referencing it with health data. He pauses. With what? Nova asks. With survival probability models, he finishes. They're identifying who's genetically expendable. Silence descends. The weight of the revelation settles like ash across the room. This isn't just a conspiracy. This is the execution phase of an extinction algorithm, civilization's final exam, and most of humanity is about to fail. Kale rises slowly, his academic detachment slipping. They've weaponized the medical system. the agricultural system, the ecosystem. We've made ourselves the delivery mechanism. As if summoned by their discovery, Jax's monitoring array explodes with alerts. Encrypted satellite traffic spike. Same network as the original Aegis packet. Nova bolts to her station, initiating decryption protocols. A file begins to download. Each percent drips in like poison. It's not code, it's a video. Meeting minutes, Lynx says, from yesterday. Nova hovers over the play button. Once we see this, there's no turning back. She clicks. The screen fills with familiar faces. Figures from news cycles and magazine covers. World leaders, biotech CEOs, tech moguls, top-level bureaucrats. They sit around a virtual conference table, casually discussing the logistics of ending the world. In one corner, a countdown timer. 18 months, 14 days, 7 hours, 23 minutes. The video is crystal clear. Studio-quality lighting, perfect audio. As if someone wanted it found by the right eyes. Nova adjusts the volume. A voice off camera. Audio check. We are now recording for archive. All participants biometrically verified. Proceed with briefing, responds a woman Nova recognizes, the director of the World Health Organization. Phase 3 implementation status, she asks. A silver-haired man appears in a new window. The tag reads, Dr. Harrison Vale, Protein Core Industries. Nova scribbles his name. She's never heard of the company, which means they've done their job. Phase 3 is on track, Dr. Vale begins. Biometric surveillance is now operational across 847 rural regions in 17 countries. Heat mapping, fertility analytics, and DNA profiling are fully functional. Genetic sequencing, Jax whispers. That requires physical samples unless they've already collected them, Coley finishes. Vale continues. Integration with consumer health devices has exceeded targets. Smartwatches, fitness apps, IoT monitors, they've covered 73% of target populations in developed regions. Nova stares at the Fitbit on her wrist, a Christmas gift from her sister. It logs her heartbeat, sleep, stress, and shares it with the cloud. Rural compliance remains challenging, Vale says, but our ag-tech partnerships offer workarounds. Routine veterinary procedures on livestock have yielded effective genomic mirrors for surrounding human populations. What does that even mean? Jax breathes. Cross-species contamination, Kale says. They're piggybacking human DNA into livestock, then tracking us through the food chain. Nova's eyes widen. Every burger, every glass of milk, every bite, carrying our genetic trace. A new speaker joins the meeting, Marcus Chen, Global Agricultural Systems. Nova flinches at the name. Agricultural vector deployment has surpassed expectations, he reports. mRNA modifiers are now integrated into livestock feed across North America and Europe. Human dietary exposure is currently at 94%. Any side effects? The WHO director asks. Minimal, as designed. Fertility rates in target zones are down 23% year over year. Autoimmune responses remain within forecasted tolerances. Nova's hands tremble. This isn't theoretical. These are progress reports on operations already in motion. Lynx leans forward. That voice, wait, I know that voice. A new window opens, central on the screen. The figure is obscured in deliberate shadow. Lighting engineered to prevent facial ID, but the voice is unmistakable, calm, controlled, authoritative. Our strongest vector remains psychological, the shadowed speaker says. Saturation campaigns have normalized ideas like population decline, climate purification, and voluntary extinction. Despair is our most effective tool. Let the people surrender before they ever resist. The screen freezes, the recording ends, and the clock in the corner keeps ticking. Social media algorithms are actively amplifying despair, hopelessness, and anti-natalist ideology across targeted demographics. Mental fatigue campaigns? The WHO director asks. Exceeding projections, someone replies. Suicide rates in targeted age groups have increased by 34% year over year. Birth rates continue to decline as anticipated. Most importantly, resistance to authority has dropped significantly. Population compliance with forthcoming directives is expected to approach totality. Jax stands up abruptly, knocking over their chair. They're not just poisoning our bodies, they're poisoning our minds. Nova pauses the video, needing a moment to process what they're witnessing. This isn't just biological warfare, she whispers. It's psychological, sociological, environmental. They've weaponized everything we rely on to survive. Food, air, water, information, Lynx lists grimly. They're not attacking civilization, Kale says quietly. They've turned civilization into the weapon. He sinks into a chair, his scientific worldview fracturing and reforming in the face of undeniable evidence. The fertility collapse, the autoimmune disorders, the epidemic of psychological depression. It's all part of the same strategy. It's all intentional. Nova restarts the video. The shadowed figure continues. Phase 4. Preparations are nearly complete. Environmental catalysts are in position. Once activated, they will trigger the latent biological modifications embedded in the target population. Estimated full activation timeline, 18 months. The WHO director nods in approval. Excellent. Resistance potential? Minimal, replies another. Independent researchers who approached dangerous discoveries have been discredited, defunded, or quietly removed from academic and professional institutions. Media coverage of related topics has been redirected to established conspiracy theory tropes, ensuring public dismissal of accurate information as delusional paranoia. Nova stares at the screen, heart pounding. How many others found pieces of this? How many were erased before they could speak? Dr. Vale, the shadowed figure continues. Status update on asset protection? Dr. Vale reappears on screen. All protection protocols are active. Essential personnel and their families have received modified treatments. Genetic compatibility with the post-implementation biosphere is confirmed. Estimated survival pool, approximately 500,000 globally. 500,000? Jax echoes, numb. Out of 7 billion? The video begins to degrade. The satellite signal is weakening. But one final exchange comes through crystal clear. Any concerns about discovery? Someone asks. Unlikely, a voice replies. The operation spans medical, agricultural, environmental, technological, and psychological systems. No single research group or intelligence agency has access to all data vectors. Except, the WHO director adds wryly, if a team existed that combined expertise in cryptography, virology, intelligence gathering, information theory, and social engineering. A low laugh from the shadowed figure. The probability of such a team existing, with access to the right data and the will to act, is statistically 0. The screen goes black. Silence envelops the warehouse. Nova, Lynx, Jax, and Kale exchange glances. A single unspoken truth hovers in the air. Well, Nova says, I guess we're statistically 0. None of them notice the tiny LED blinking on Jax's communications rig, the one indicating unauthorized network monitoring. Their 0 probability team just became a confirmed threat, and somewhere, Phase 4 has just been accelerated. At exactly 4:17 a.m., 3 hours after they finished reviewing the intercepted meeting, the warehouse's security system erupts in sirens. Nova jolts awake at her desk, surrounded by documents and screens. Warning lights flash red across every terminal. Intrusion detection systems are triggering across the board. "Lynx!" she yells, heart racing. "We've got company." Lynx rolls from his sleeping bag, grabbing his go bag and laptop. "What kind of company?" "The kind that uses military-grade cyber tools." Nova snaps, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Someone's been inside our systems. They've seen everything." Jax stumbles in from the back room, purple hair tousled but eyes alert. "How long have they been watching us?" "Unknown," Nova says. "But they have root access. They're not just spying, they're erasing. Our files are vanishing." Kale appears, clutching a hard drive. "I backed up all the biological data to an air-gapped system. If we lose the main servers, we are losing them," Nova confirms. "They're scrubbing everything." But even as the digital walls collapse, Nova's mind moves faster. "Jax, initiate the mesh network. Lynx, get the satellite uplink. We're going distributed." The warehouse shifts. What once looked like a hacker den transforms into a high-functioning intelligence bunker. Jax's workstation unfolds into a full-spectrum comms hub. Lynx pulls encrypted gear from a hidden compartment. Nova's desk conceals secondary servers and backup batteries. "Professor," Nova calls, "how much of your data is stored offline?" "All of it," Kale replies. "I stopped trusting cloud servers after they burned my career. As their digital infrastructure dissolves, the team executes an emergency protocol they had hoped to never use. Critical files are sent to redundant safe houses. Communications reroute to dark web nodes. Physical evidence is packed in go bags. But Nova's not running, not yet. Instead, she's tracing the breach." "What are you doing?" Lynx demands. "If they're watching us," she growls, "then we're watching them." Her screen bursts with data streams, packet traces, DNS routing chains, proxy networks. The attack is elite. Multiple layers of obfuscation, but high complexity leaves fingerprints. "There," she whispers. "They're not just stealing our data, they're planting something." The upload completes. Nova opens the file, face twisting in horror. "Child pornography," Lynx says, voice hard. "They're framing us." Nova nods. "Brilliant. Discredit us entirely. Bury the truth under revulsion." But her trace reveals something else. A location. "They're not foreign operatives," she says. "They're operating from the Protein Core building. Vale's company. The same people who discussed wiping out humanity 3 hours ago," Jax adds. "We need to leave," Lynx urges. But Nova's still at her console, her eyes locked on a new stream of intercepted audio. "Wait, they're having an emergency meeting, right now, about us." She patches it through the speaker. Dr. Vale's voice. "Confirmed. They possess Phase 3 documentation. Full implementation specs." "Impossible," says the WHO director. "That material is compartmentalized under 17 separate classification tiers." "Unknown how they acquired it," Vale replies. "But their operational capabilities imply access to state-level intelligence assets." The shadowed figure cuts in, voice sharper now. "Irrelevant. If they go public, the entire operation collapses. Immediate containment required." "What kind of containment?" Vale asks. "Total, the team, their facility, burn it. Gas leak, chemical fire, whatever destroys every trace." Nova's blood runs cold. "How much time?" asks the WHO director. "Tactical team en route, 20 minutes. Nova shuts down systems. "We're blown. They're sending a kill squad." 20 minutes? Jax checks their watch. "That's not enough." "It's enough for one thing." Nova interrupts, launching her final protocol. We can't save ourselves, but we can save the data. She starts uploading everything to a decentralized blockchain archive. Tamper-proof, unstoppable, out of their enemy's reach. But it's massive. The connection is weak. Upload time, 17 minutes, the system reports. 3 minutes to spare, Lynx mutters, checking his rifle. But new alarms scream, motion sensors trip, thermal pings outside, multiple vehicles. They lied, Nova breathes. They're already here. Black SUVs swarm the perimeter. Tactical lights sweep through broken windows. Radio chatter echoes from the darkness. Upload at 32%, the terminal reports. Nova looks at the others, her friends, her resistance family. Jax, the optimist. Lynx, the protector. Kale, the truth seeker. I need 8 minutes, she whispers. Can you give me that? Lynx shoulders his weapon, the same model he carried on government missions. He scans their sanctuary, their battlefield, their final stand. Yeah, he says, we'll give you 8. We can give you 8 minutes. As the first breaching charges detonated against the warehouse doors, Nova's fingers danced across the keyboard, uploading humanity's final testimony into the digital wind. Outside, boots thundered against concrete. Orders were shouted in clipped tactical shorthand. Inside, 4 individuals who had uncovered the truth behind humanity's end fought to ensure someone, anyone, would learn what really happened. The upload bar crawled forward. 47%, 48%, 51%. In the distance, sirens wailed. Whether they signaled help or cleanup, no one could say. Upload progress, 73%. Nova's hands moved with mechanical precision, even as automatic weapons fire ripped through the warehouse's steel-plated walls. Lynx and Jax had constructed a makeshift defensive position behind stacked server racks, returning fire with the modest arsenal Lynx had maintained precisely for this scenario. Kale crouched beside Nova, clutching backup drives like sacred relics. How much longer? Lynx shouted over the gunfire, ejecting an empty magazine. 3 minutes, Nova called back, sweat dripping onto the keys as she fought to keep the connection alive through power fluctuations. A tactical officer appeared at a shattered window. Jax dropped him with a single, precise shot, the kind their grandfather had once taught them while plinking soda cans off fence posts in rural Oregon. He never imagined that lesson would one day defend the future of the species. Upload progress, 81%. Nova! Kale shouted, pointing at the main screen. They're jamming our satellite. Nova looked up. Their upload speed was plummeting. The decentralized storage was failing as electromagnetic pulses hammered their systems. Years of planning, layers of redundancy, multiple backups, all being unraveled by an enemy who understood them far too well. Switch to hardline, she barked, yanking cables from concealed floor ports. If the satellites are down, we go terrestrial. But even as she rerouted the connection through buried fiber optic lines, the screens told the truth. These weren't just soldiers, they were technicians, experts in signal warfare. This wasn't an assault, it was a digital sterilization. Upload progress, 89%. They're inside the network, Nova muttered, watching as files corrupted mid-transfer. They're not jamming the signal, they're poisoning it. Malicious code poured in through every line, infecting not just local systems but the destination servers themselves. No matter where they uploaded the evidence, the same viruses followed, wiping it clean before it could propagate. 90 seconds, Lynx shouted, reloading. Nova's mind scanned for alternatives. Local drives, compromised. Cloud, infected. Peer-to-peer, monitored. Then she remembered. One network their enemies likely hadn't anticipated. "Jax!" she yelled. "Emergency radio protocol. Can you reach the ham networks? Jax nodded instantly. Analog communication, shortwave radio, predating the internet by decades. It might be their last unguarded path. As Jax assembled gear, Nova began compressing their data into audio-transmittable packets. Project Aegis, population control, biological re-engineering, all encoded for transmission through shortwave frequencies. Upload progress, 94%. Transmission corrupted. Their internet connection blinked out entirely as another EMP struck, frying what was left of their digital infrastructure. Then Jax's radio crackled to life. Somewhere, the old network still breathed. "This is Emergency Station Alpha, calling CQ Emergency Traffic," Jax announced. "We have critical data for immediate relay. Repeat, critical data for immediate relay." Static, then replies. Dozens of voices answered. Retired engineers, disaster volunteers, hobbyists, the last free channel on Earth. Nova started the transmission. Fragments went out to different operators with instructions for reconstruction and distribution. It was slow, inefficient, messy, but it was working, until the lights failed. Emergency lighting flooded the space in blood red. Outside, they could see power lines being severed. Methodically, surgically. The building was being cut off from the grid. "They're isolating everything," Kale murmured. "Power, internet, spectrum, total blackout." Nova's laptop battery gave her 10 minutes, maybe less. She kept transmitting. Data fragments, tiny digital seeds scattered to the wind. "Nova!" Lynx shouted. "Movement on the roof. They're coming through the skylights." She looked up. Tactical teams were rappelling through the ceiling. Night vision, thermal optics, precision. In 30 seconds, they would control the room. In 30 seconds, Project Aegis would vanish from human memory. But Nova had one last move. A gamble that broke every rule she'd ever followed. She grabbed her personal phone. "Going live," she whispered, opening a social media app and starting a live stream. "My name is Nova Chen," she said, staring directly into the camera as gunfire erupted behind her. "If you're watching this, you need to know the truth. Governments and corporations are planning to kill most of the human race." Viewer count climbing. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. "They call it Project Aegis," she continued, unwavering. "It's population reduction. They've modified vaccines, contaminated the food supply, weaponized the climate and your devices. Tactical operatives breached their defenses. Lynx was hit, blood spilling across the floor. Jax kept broadcasting, even as red laser dots danced across their chest. 18 months, Nova said. "That's the timeline. If you've been vaccinated, if you eat processed food, if you wear a fitness tracker, you're already part of the system." A rifle butt struck her face. The phone spun across the floor. The live stream continued, now showing boots, shadows, spreading blood. But it was enough. In just over 3 minutes, more than 50,000 people saw Nova Chen's final message. And in a hyper-connected world, 50,000 becomes 5 million overnight. The last image her phone captured was a gloved hand lifting it. A voice, off-screen, calm and final. "Sanitize everything. No evidence, no witnesses, no trace this place ever existed." Then static, then silence, then nothing. 6 months later, the official report from the Woodland Fire Department described it as a tragic industrial accident. Improper chemical storage in a condemned warehouse. 4 dead. Total loss. Local news ran it for one day. The live stream that briefly circulated online was flagged for graphic content and misinformation. Deleted, blocked, account suspended. But the internet never forgets what it's forbidden to remember. On encrypted forums and dark web threads, fragments of Nova's broadcast still circulate. Screenshots, audio clips, transcripts, shared by digital monks and conspiracy archivists who know something real happened. Truth Seeker 2000. Anyone remember that girl from the warehouse? Nova Chen? Project Aegis? Video's gone, but I swear I saved it. Digital Ghost. Same. File corrupted when I tried to open it. Everything vanished. Red Pill Reality. Still remember what she said. Biological modifications, population collapse, food contamination. 18 months, we're down to 12. Meanwhile, ham radio operators trade pieces of the data. Academic researchers compare unexplained anomalies in vaccines, agriculture, environment. Quiet whispers emerge. Dr. Sarah Martinez at UC Davis publishes data on declining rural fertility. Professor David Kim at MIT finds non-therapeutic proteins in vaccine batches. His funding disappears within 3 weeks. Journalist Lisa Chen investigates biometric gear in remote regions. Her article gets pulled. Every censored study, every deleted post, every buried broadcast becomes another signal in the noise. A signal that says, Nova was right. The truth spreads like a virus through the digital underground. 12 months later, Maya Patel is 17 years old and has never heard of Nova Chen, Lynx Rodriguez, Jax Morrison, or Professor Kale. She lives in a small village in rural India, where internet access is limited and social media is a luxury reserved for urban elites. But Maya is curious, sharp, and determined. She has access to her school's computer lab 3 days a week, where she spends her time learning about environmental science, genetic engineering, and the intersection of biology and technology. Her dream is to study at a university abroad and help solve the world's agricultural challenges. During one of her lab sessions, she finds a flash drive buried in a box of discarded electronics donated to the school. It's wrapped in plastic and electrical tape, as though someone had tried very hard to preserve it. The faded ink label reads, Population 0, Proof Vault. Maya plugs it into the computer, expecting to find old homework or family photos. Instead, she discovers 847 gigabytes of encrypted files, research documents, intercepted communications, and video logs. She finds genetic modification protocols, pharmaceutical patents, agricultural contamination strategies, and psychological warfare models. She finds the complete archive of everything Nova Chen's team uncovered about Project Aegis. The encryption is military grade, but Maya is patient. She spends 3 weeks cracking the codes, working through lunch breaks and staying after school until the janitor turns off the lights. Once inside, she spends another week trying to understand what she's found. Population reduction through coordinated biological intervention. Genetic modification systems triggered by environmental factors. Food chain contamination engineered to induce sterility and immune failure. Psychological warfare campaigns designed to normalize extinction and suppress resistance to authority. A timeline that originally targeted the year 2030, but has since accelerated to 2027. Maya realizes she's looking at a blueprint for planned global extinction. And the most recent files suggest the final phase is scheduled to begin in 6 months. She copies the archive to multiple storage devices and begins verifying it, cross-referencing every claim with publicly available data, patent filings, agricultural records, vaccine compositions, environmental monitoring trends. Everything Nova's team reported checks out. Every shred of evidence is valid, and almost no one knows. But Maya Patel is 17, raised in a culture that honors education and truth above fear. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't second guess. She doesn't think about staying silent. She uploads the entire archive to every platform she can access: WikiLeaks, anonymous Dropboxes, academic repositories, social media networks, government watchdog sites. She submits it to journalist tip lines, activist groups, research forums, and whistleblower channels. She translates the most critical files into 17 languages and disseminates them across international networks. She creates simplified versions for public consumption and technical breakdowns for experts. She floods the internet with the truth, and this time it's too late to stop the signal. Within hours, Maya's uploads are being downloaded thousands of times. Within days, those downloads turn to millions. Major media outlets pick up the story. World governments demand investigations. Health organizations call emergency sessions. The carefully orchestrated global depopulation plan, executed through vaccines, food systems, and digital surveillance, becomes the most thoroughly documented conspiracy in history. Dr. Harrison Vale tries to discredit the data as an elaborate hoax. The WHO director claims the communications were taken out of context. Government officials deny all knowledge, but the archive is too comprehensive, the independent verification too vast, too many researchers in too many nations, working with too many separate methodologies, all reach the same conclusion. Project Aegis is real. It's active, and it's working. Global fertility rates have dropped 34% in just 3 years. Autoimmune disorders have surged 78% among populations that received modified vaccine batches. Agricultural workers in engineered crop zones exhibit genetic markers consistent with targeted exposure. Psychological depression and suicide rates have spiked in exactly the age brackets targeted by social programming initiatives. This is not a future threat. This is a mass extinction event in progress. 18 months after the warehouse assault, Maya Patel stands before the International Criminal Court at The Hague. Behind her, screens display population curves, fertility statistics, mortality data, and genetic manipulation records. She holds up the same flash drive she found in a plastic-wrapped bundle in her school's electronics box. This device, she tells the court, contains the full archive of Project Aegis. It was compiled by 4 researchers who died trying to expose what was being done to us. She places the drive on the witness stand. Nova Chen was 26 when she was murdered for uncovering that our governments and corporations had poisoned humanity. Lynx Rodriguez was 32 when he died defending her right to speak. Jax Morrison was 21 when they gave their life to transmit this data to the world. Professor Kyle was 58 when he was silenced for asking the wrong questions. She looks directly at the defendants: pharmaceutical executives, defense officials, corporate elites, sitting behind bulletproof glass. They died so we could live. They died so humanity would know the truth. They died so that the people responsible for the greatest genocide in history could be held accountable. She lifts the flash drive once more. Their names were Nova, Lynx, Jax, and Kyle. They saved us, and they deserve to be remembered for it. The courtroom falls into silence. Victims' families weep. Journalists race to file stories that will be read by billions. And in a small village in India, Maya's former computer science teacher watches the live stream and smiles quietly. Sometimes the truth survives. Sometimes the good guys win. Sometimes 4 people in a forgotten warehouse save the world, long after they're gone. Epilogue. The network remembers. 5 years later, the Maya Patel Institute for Digital Truth and Transparency now occupies a gleaming tower in New Geneva, funded by reparations from the corporations responsible for Project Aegis. Carved in stone above the entrance, the network remembers everything, especially the things someone desperately wanted forgotten. In the lobby, 4 portraits hang side by side. Nova Chen, cryptographer and digital warrior. Lynx Rodriguez, intelligence analyst and protector. Jax Morrison, social engineer and prodigy. Professor Kyle, biologist and truth seeker. Beneath their faces a simple inscription. They found the code that wasn't meant to be found. Tourists pass by the portraits. Students study beneath them. Many never learn the full story, but the staff knows. The researchers and digital activists working within those walls understand the legacy they carry. And late at night, when the Institute sleeps and only the servers hum, network monitors sometimes register anomalies, ghost signals, fragments of data, rerouted packets through untraceable paths. Some say it's just static, glitches, digital echoes, but others believe it's more than that. The voices of 4 warriors, still broadcasting, still uploading, still fighting to keep the truth alive. In the spaces between the data, the network remembers,